Have you ever wondered how the clave affects the instruments in salsa music? The clave is considered the most important rhythm in salsa, the key to the music. And in this video, you're about to find out why. Welcome to Salsa Goals, and let's get started. In part 2 of this video series, we examined one way in which the clave affects the music. So if you haven't seen that yet, please check it out. But if you have seen it, here's a second way that the clave affects the music. It guides the instrumental rhythmic patterns. Salsa music has a lot going on musically because so many different instruments are involved. You have the piano, the bass, the trumpets, the trombones, the congas, the bongos, the timbales, the guiro, and more. Yet nearly every instrument plays a rhythmic pattern based on the direction of the clave. In other words, the instrument will play its rhythmic pattern one way on the 2 side of the clave and then the opposite way on the 3 side of the clave. There are many examples, but we'll take a look at just 2 of them to see how this works. The timbales sometimes use 2 very noticeable rhythmic patterns that emphasize the clave very well. For example, the mambo bell pattern is played on the bell that sits on top of the timbales, and another pattern called the cascada pattern is played by hitting the side of the timbales. But let's take a closer look at the cascada pattern, because it's basically like a more complex version of the clave rhythm itself. In other words, even if you can't hear the actual clave sticks being played, you can still detect the clave rhythm because it's contained within the cascada pattern. On the 2 side of the clave, the basic cascada pattern sounds like this. On the 3 side of the clave, the basic cascada pattern sounds like this. So, if the clave has a 2-3 direction, this is how the full cascada pattern sounds. However, if the clave is using a 3-2 direction, then this is how the full cascada pattern sounds. Did you notice how the cascada pattern with a 3-2 clave is basically like the 2-3 clave version, but in reverse? So please check out the link at the top right-hand corner of the screen to see a demonstration of both the cascada pattern and the mambo bell pattern. And if you're enjoying the information in this video so far, please feel free to give it a like and comment below. Now another good example of this is the piano montuno pattern. This is a piano pattern that repeats itself over and over again, and it can sound different depending upon the song. But regardless of the melody used, the rhythm of the montuno pattern usually tends to highlight the clave in a specific way. So let's take a look at one of the basic montuno patterns. On the 2 side of the clave, a basic montuno pattern might sound like this. But on the 3 side of the clave, the montuno pattern might sound like this. So, if the clave is using a 2-3 direction, then the full montuno pattern would sound like this. However, if the clave is using a 3-2 direction, then that same full montuno pattern would sound like this. Again, notice how the 3-2 clave version of the piano montuno is basically the reverse of the 2-3 clave version. So if you're interested in learning more about salsa piano patterns, then check out the book 101 Piano Montunos by Rebecca Mauleon. To sum it up, the direction of the clave affects the way that nearly every instrumental rhythm is played. So if the clave is going in one direction, say 2-3, then the instruments will generally play a pattern with a particular rhythm. But if the clave is going in the opposite direction, say 3-2, then the instruments will generally play that same rhythmic pattern, but in reverse. And for the most part, this goes for nearly all the instruments in a salsa music ensemble, even the rhythm of the lyrics. And while these changes in the rhythmic patterns are very noticeable for certain instruments, like the timbales and the piano, they can sometimes be a little harder to hear for other instruments. In fact, some instruments like the campana, the guiro, and the maracas highlight the pulse more so than they do the clave. And, unfortunately, you might not hear the clave sticks playing the clave rhythm clearly very often. In fact, the clave rhythm itself can often be camouflaged, like a chameleon, hiding in the rhythmic pattern of other instruments. But if you listen carefully, you may be able to hear different instruments emphasizing the clave rhythm. And if you can at least match part of a rhythmic pattern to either the 2-side or the 3-side of the clave, then you might be able to figure out the clave direction of the song. But in order to do that, you'll need to be able to do something else first. What is that? Well, stay tuned for part 4 of this video series, and we'll discuss one more easy way to figure out the clave direction in a salsa song. So until then, stay safe, stay connected to the music, and keep dancing salsa.